The moment they announced the winner, Daniel Hayes felt his whole world collapse into a single, humiliating heartbeat. Because the prize everyone thought he'd finally earned was handed instead to the chairman's own daughter, and nobody in that boardroom said a single word to stop it. For 3 consecutive years, Daniel had been the top seller at Meridian Business Solutions. 3 years of missed dinners, of driving across the state at midnight to close one more deal, of raising his 8-year-old daughter Lily alone after her mother walked out when Lily was barely 2. 3 years of promises to himself that this year, this ceremony, this recognition would finally mean something, not just for his paycheck, but for his pride, for the example he wanted to set for his little girl. And in one afternoon, in front of 200 colleagues, all of it was swept aside as if it had never happened. If stories like this move you, stories about people who get knocked down and somehow find the strength to rise again, take a second right now to like this video. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Share it with someone who needs a little hope today. And subscribe to Humanity Tales, because we believe everyone deserves a second chance. Daniel had walked into that ceremony with his top button undone, tie slightly loosened, still smelling faintly of the coffee he'd spilled on himself trying to get Lily to school on time that morning. He wasn't nervous. He had the numbers. He had the client testimonials. He had spreadsheets that told a story no one could argue with. But numbers, it turned out, meant nothing against blood. When Chairman Whitfield stepped up to the podium and called his own daughter Camille's name for Salesperson of the Year, the applause was thin, uncertain, scattered, the kind of clapping people do when they're not sure if they're supposed to be clapping at all. Daniel remembered sitting there with his jaw tight, watching Camille smile and accept a plaque for numbers that, everyone in that room quietly knew, had been padded by deals Daniel himself had helped close under her name because he'd been asked to mentor her. He didn't make a scene. He never was the type. He simply stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked out of the ceremony hall while his coworkers exchanged glances they thought he couldn't see. That night, he sat at his kitchen table long after Lily had gone to sleep, staring at a 2-week-old resignation letter he'd drafted in a moment of frustration and never sent. This time, he signed it. The weeks that followed were harder than he expected. Being a single father had never been easy, but at least there had been a rhythm to it. Wake up, get Lily ready, drop her at school, sell, pick her up, homework, dinner, bed, repeat. Without the job, the rhythm collapsed. Savings that once felt comfortable began shrinking with alarming speed. He applied to competitor firms, but word travels fast in small industries, and more than one interviewer mentioned, with a careful smile, that they'd heard he left Meridian under complicated circumstances. No one wanted complicated. Doors that should have opened easily stayed shut, and for the first time in years, Daniel felt something dangerously close to shame, not because he had done anything wrong, but because doing everything right hadn't been enough to protect him. Lily, though too young to understand corporate politics, understood her father's silence at the dinner table, understood the new furrow between his eyebrows, understood that some nights he sat in his car in the driveway for 10 extra minutes before coming inside, composing himself. She never asked him directly what was wrong. Instead, she left small things on his desk, a drawing of the two of them holding hands under a sun with a smiling face, a note in crooked handwriting that said, "You are the best dad in the whole world," a chocolate bar she'd saved from a school party because she noticed he always gave his snacks to her. Children see more than adults give them credit for, and Lily, in her quiet 8-year-old way, was trying to hold her father together with construction paper and crayons. 3 months after leaving Meridian, with rent looming and pride finally losing its battle against necessity, Daniel took a job that paid roughly half of what he used to earn, inside sales for a small logistics company most people had never heard of. It was humbling. He went from managing million-dollar accounts to cold-calling small business owners who sometimes hung up before he finished his first sentence. But he showed up every single day because Lily was watching and because somewhere deep inside him, a stubborn ember refused to go out. He told himself that talent doesn't disappear just because circumstances change, and one late night, exhausted and doubting everything, he found an old photo of Lily's crayon drawing taped inside his desk drawer, the one that said, "You are the best dad in the whole world," and something in him steadied. At the tiny logistics company, something unexpected began to happen. Daniel's work ethic, so recently dismissed and undervalued, stood out immediately in a much smaller pond. Within 6 months, he wasn't just meeting quotas, he was rebuilding entire client relationships that previous employees had let go cold. He treated every small business owner the way he wished someone had treated him, with honesty, patience, and respect, whether the deal was worth $200 or $200,000. Slowly, quietly, without ceremonies or plaques, his reputation began rebuilding itself, one satisfied client at a time. The owner of the company, a soft-spoken woman named Patricia who had built her business from a single delivery van, began mentoring him personally, teaching him not just sales, but how contracts were structured, how margins worked, how a business actually breathed and survived. Daniel absorbed it all like a man finally being handed the missing piece of a puzzle he hadn't known was incomplete. Meanwhile, at Meridian, cracks were forming that Daniel knew nothing about. Camille, thrust into more senior responsibilities because of her award-winning performance, began making decisions she wasn't equipped to make. Contracts were lost. Long-term clients, the very ones Daniel had nurtured for years, started noticing the change in service and quietly began looking elsewhere. Within 18 months, Meridian's numbers, once the envy of the industry, had slid into a worrying decline, and whispers began circulating that the company that once thrived on loyalty and trust had lost both. 2 years after walking out of that boardroom, Daniel, now a senior partner at the logistics company, and quietly a minority stakeholder after helping the business triple in size, received an email that made him sit back in his chair. It was from Meridian's board, not from Chairman Whitfield himself, requesting a meeting to discuss what they called a potential strategic partnership. Daniel almost laughed out loud at his desk. The very company that had once dismissed his years of work now needed the very skills they had refused to properly reward. He agreed to the meeting, not out of revenge, but out of curiosity, and perhaps a small human need for closure. When he walked into Meridian's boardroom for the first time in 2 years, dressed not as a desperate applicant but as an equal, the room fell into a silence far heavier than any applause could have been. Chairman Whitfield, visibly older, visibly worn down by 2 years of declining numbers and mounting pressure from the actual board, extended a hand that trembled slightly. Daniel shook it, calm and composed, the same way he had walked out that day, without drama, without cruelty, simply present. During the meeting, it became clear that Meridian needed exactly what Daniel's small company now offered: reliable logistics partnerships that could save Meridian's remaining major clients from leaving entirely. Daniel negotiated fairly, firmly, and without a trace of bitterness, because he had learned something in those 2 hard years that no ceremony could have taught him: that dignity, patience, and quiet excellence eventually speak louder than any stolen plaque ever could. The partnership was signed. Meridian survived, humbled, and Daniel returned home that evening not as a man seeking vindication, but as a father who could finally tell his daughter, without hesitation, that hard work and honesty do matter, even when the world seems determined to prove otherwise. That night he found Lily, now 11, sitting at the kitchen table doing homework, the same kitchen table where he had once signed his resignation letter in defeated silence. He sat down across from her, and for the first time in years, he let himself really smile, not the tired, forced smile he'd worn through the hardest months, but something lighter, something earned. Lily looked up and asked simply how his big meeting went, and Daniel told her that sometimes, when someone takes something from you unfairly, the best revenge isn't anger. It's becoming someone so solid, so genuine, that eventually they have no choice but to come back and ask for your help. Lily, in her characteristically simple wisdom, just smiled and said she always knew he was the best, and went back to